Okay, so let's dive right into Galatians chapter 2 today.
Yeah, this chapter is, well, it's absolutely packed. A really key moment.
It really sets the stage for some core early Christian debates, doesn't it, about, who the gospel is actually for.
Exactly. And how someone gets right with God. Big questions.
It kicks off with Paul's big trip back to Jerusalem, says it's 14 years later.
14 years. He takes Barnabas along and Titus too.
And Titus is key here, being a Greek.
Definitely. So Paul goes, he says, by revelation to lay out the gospel he's been preaching to the Gentiles.
Well, he does it privately, right, to the leaders first.
Yes, privately with those considered pillars, James, Peter, John. He wanted to basically check in.
Make sure he wasn't running or hadn't run in vain. That's quite a statement.
It shows how serious this was. The unity of the message was on the line.
And then the Titus situation comes up immediately.
Right. Titus, a Greek, was with him, and Paul makes a point. He was not compelled to be circumcised.
Even though there were these false brothers, Paul mentions, people who'd snuck in.
Exactly. He calls them spies, essentially.
Yep.
Trying to bring believers back under the restrictions of the Jewish law, take away their freedom in Christ.
But Paul didn't budge.
Not for a second, he says.
Yeah.
He stood firm to preserve the truth of the gospel, that core message.
So what happened with the main leaders, the pillars?
Well, fascinatingly, James, Peter, and John, they recognized the grace given to Paul. They added nothing to his message.
Nothing. That's huge.
It really is. They saw God was working through Paul with the Gentiles, just like through Peter with the Jews.
So they agreed on a kind of division of focus.
Yeah, they gave Paul and Barnabas the right hand of fellowship, agreeing Paul would focus on the Gentiles and they on the Jews.
Any conditions?
Just one request,
It's time for the poor.
which Paul says he was already eager to do.
Yeah.
So a moment of real agreement there in Jerusalem.
Okay, seems settled then. But then Antioch happens.
Ah, yes, Antioch. This shows how challenging it was to live this out consistently.
What did Peter do?
So Peter was there, and initially he was eating with the Gentile believers, fully integrated, showing that unity.
Which was radical at the time.
Absolutely. But then some people associated with James arrived from Jerusalem.
And Peter changed his behavior.
He did. Paul says Peter drew back, separated himself because he was afraid of the circumcision group, those pushing for Gentiles to follow Jewish law.
Wow, so fear undid that visible unity.
And it wasn't just him. Paul says his hypocrisy, that's the word Paul uses, influenced other Jewish believers.
Even Barnabas, Paul's close partner.
Even Barnabas got carried away. It shows how powerful that pressure was.
So Paul couldn't just let this go.
No way. He confronted Peter publicly, in front of everyone.
What was the core of his challenge? What did he say?
He basically said, Peter, you're a Jew, but you live like a Gentile, not like a Jew. So how on earth can you now try and force Gentiles to follow Jewish customs?
Direct, calling out the inconsistency.
Absolutely. And this whole incident becomes the springboard for Paul to lay down the fundamental theology.
This is where he really spells out justification by faith.
Exactly. He states it so clearly. We know that a person is not justified by the works of the law, but by faith in Jesus Christ.
Not by rule keeping, but by trusting Christ.
He repeats it for emphasis, because by the works of the law, no one will be justified. It's foundational.
And then he makes it deeply personal, doesn't he?
Oh, yes. This isn't just abstract theology for Paul. He says, I have been crucified with Christ.
And I no longer live, but Christ lives in me.
Powerful stuff. The life I now live in the body, I live by faith in the Son of God, who loved me and gave himself for me.
His entire identity, his source of life, is shifted from law-keeping to Christ dwelling in him through faith.
Precisely. And that leads to his final point in this section about grace.
Right. What does he say there?
He declares, I do not set aside the grace of God. Why? Because if righteousness could be gained through the law, Christ died for nothing.
That really puts it starkly. The stakes couldn't be higher. If law following could save, Christ's death was pointless.
It's a mic drop moment, really. It frames the entire debate.
So